This is a webinar to provide research administrators with some basic information about the requirements for single IRB of record for collaborative research. I'm here with my colleague Judy Burke, who's the director of IRB Med, and I'm the director of the IRB HSBS, which is the IRB for campus units and for Flint and Dearborn. So welcome to our presentation. We'll take questions via chat at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to enter any questions you might have in the chat function, and we'll address those as we're able at the end of the presentation. And also, we would ask everybody to be sure that you have muted yourselves. So the key points we'd like to cover for you today are key definitions, what a single IRB of record is. The main reason we're making this presentation today is there are going to be a few new questions in the path, and we'll address how this impacts the grant preparation process, and then some details about the process for investigators with the IRB. So first key definition is what's a multi-site study. And as we know, our investigators are often involved in research collaborations. And a multi-site study is a project that involves collaborators from more than one institution who are involved in the conduct of the same research protocol. NIH considers the same research protocol to mean that sites function to address the same research questions, involve the same methodologies, and evaluate the same outcomes. This may also be known as a collaborative or cooperative research project. So examples of multi-site research projects may be a project that is in the model of a typical clinical trial, for example, where there is a study intervention and data collection at 3 different sites. And each site is conducting essentially the same research activities. And another model may be where there are 3 participating institutions, but each institution maybe has a slightly different research activity taking place at each location. So there are a number of models of IRB oversight for such IRB multi-site research. Traditionally, the IRB at each participating site has conducted its own IRB review. And this has been challenging over the years because each IRB may have different concerns about the research protocol and has often resulted in significant delays in being able to get a research project off the ground. The new model, which is where one IRB, known as the single IRB of record, conducts the regulatory review for all of the participating sites. And then there's more of a hybrid model where some sites may conduct their own IRB review and some sites may rely on the single IRB to conduct the IRB review for the project. And I'll note, and I'll probably note later on also, there are certain situations where the single IRB model may not work because of collaborators that are in international settings that may have slightly different regulations or different local context concerns. And in those cases, there might be more of a hybrid IRB review model in place. So another key definition is what is the single IRB of record? And what that means is that one of the collaborating institutions or a commercial or independent IRB may be designated as the reviewing IRB for all of the participating sites in the study. And so that means that that entity is responsible for the regulatory review of the study and oversight, regulatory oversight for the participating sites that are engaged in the conduct of research. However, that doesn't mean that those participating sites no longer have any responsibility for the research. They are still responsible for ensuring that the research is conducted ethically at their site and by their investigators, consistent with the approved protocol. And also, there may be other reviews that have to take place at their particular research location. Everybody, just a reminder, please be sure that your sound is muted. Thank you. So the reason that this has come into, this use of this model has come into play more frequently is that NIH and now the federal government more broadly have a mandate that a use of a single IRB of record is required for most multi-site collaborative research. The NIH established a policy that was effective in January 2018. And so we have been practicing in this realm for a couple of years. NIH established their single IRB policy for multi-site research. And so that means that any domestic research supported by cooperative agreements, grants, or the NIH intramural program have to designate a single IRB of record. But this doesn't apply to foreign sites and then other types of grants such as K, T, or F grants. And then following up on the NIH policy, in January 2020, the revised common rule expanded the requirement to designate a single IRB of record to all cooperative research funded or supported by the federal common rule agencies. And so the common rule represents the regulations that govern the conduct of research with human subjects. Domestically, well, really, in all cases, for research that is supported by a federal agency. And so that it includes all of the sponsoring agencies that you can think of, including the NIH, the NSF, the Department of Defense, Department of Energy. The one thing that's interesting is that the U.S. Department of Justice, while a common rule agency, has not yet implemented the revised common rule, and so they still adhere to the previous version of our regulations. So they're a little bit of a different entity. So there are some exceptions to this federal single IRB designation requirement. The first is that it applies only to projects that are fully regulated by the IRBs, which mean projects that fall within the requirements for a full committee or an expedited review. There are certain categories of exempt research projects that involve research with human subjects, but are minimal risk projects that fall outside of this requirement. And this would not apply to FDA regulated research, but to other federal research. Another thing that we look at when we consider whether a single IRB requirement is necessary is whether the research collaborators and institutions are engaged in the research, and that means that these investigators are involved in either interacting or intervening with human subjects as part of the research, or they are also involved in analyzing or collecting personally identifiable private information. The regulations do not, single IRB requirement does not apply to research collaborators who are outside the US or research conducted outside the US. And there may be certain cases where a single IRB review is not permitted by tribal law. There may be state laws that would come into play. But if it's a project that involves multiple collaborators, those domestic partners that did not have these limitations would require single IRB, where these other entities might not. And then both the common rule and the NIH requirements do permit the option of an exception to the single IRB requirement, but it's our understanding that it's quite difficult to get the federal government to make an exception to the single IRB requirement. I'll also note, although this is primarily focused on federal sponsors, that there are industry sponsors and some foundations that may also require the use of a single IRB arrangement. So what's different about this? So when we enter into a single IRB of record relationship with another institution, these are managed by reliance agreements, also known as IRB authorization agreements. And this is an agreement between institutions. So in our case, it's the Human Research Protection Program Director that is the one that, as a representative of the institutional official, who is Rebecca Cunningham, has the authority to enter into these agreements with other institutions. The study teams don't have that authority to enter into an agreement. So these are institution to institution agreements that we work with our investigators to establish. And one thing that we would like to note for you is that University of Michigan has become a member of an entity called SMART IRB, which is a national consortium of major research institutions that have entered into a standard reliance agreement. So it means that we already have an agreement with these, with our colleagues at other institutions. And we have said that we're going to rely upon standardized procedures to manage these agreements across our institutions. So there are a number of different single IRB arrangements. U of M can be designated as the single IRB of record. So we would be the either IRB Med or IRB HSBS would be designated as the reviewing IRB for all of the participating sites in the study. Or we may enter into an agreement where our IRBs cede oversight to an external IRB, meaning that we become the relying IRB in this case. And there are two entities that we would typically rely on. One is an independent, also known as a commercial IRB, or there are also, for example, NIH has a central IRB, or National Cancer Institute, I should say. And then the other arrangements are with other academic institutions or other medical IRBs. And so there are a number of different considerations associated with these arrangements. When U of M serves as the reviewing IRB, the IRB is responsible for the review and approval of the initial study protocol. It's responsible for reviewing the template documents that will be used, for example, the informed consent documents, the survey measures, recruitment materials, and then also once the study is approved, we're responsible for reviewing amendments to the study overall. our IRB was also responsible for reviewing any incident reports, adverse events, protocol deviations, other reportable events that are associated with the study. And then our IRB is also responsible for collecting and reporting the continuing review data for the study. And so where we're in a relationship with, say, one or two other institutions, this may not be such a challenging undertaking, but particularly on the clinical side, it is not unusual for there to be 10, 20, 30 sites involved in a particular study. So you can see that that serving as the IRB of record might represent a significant burden both on the U of M IRB and also on the research team responsible for managing the research project. And where we have participating, so not on the U of M side, but on the participating site side, those entities are still responsible for being sure to let our IRB know about any particular local context requirements at their site. They need to provide us with information that's specific to their sites regarding laws, requirements for informed consent. They also are responsible for making sure their people have the right training, they have the right qualifications to do the research. They would conduct any ancillary committee reviews that might be necessary, for example, any sort of investigational drug requirements or radiation requirements. Big one on the social behavioral side would be conflict of interest reviews. So where U of M is serving as the relying institution, the regulatory review is conducted by the external IRB, whereas we would provide information to that external IRB about any special requirements at our site. Our investigators still have to submit an e-research application. We have an application called Review by Non-U of M IRB that is used to route the application through any required ancillary committees here at U of M. It allows us to track the study team members on our side, make sure they have the appropriate training and that they have disclosed conflicts of interest. Again, in these arrangements, we still are responsible for making sure that our investigators conduct the research consistent with the requirements of the single IRB at the reviewing IRB. So in some cases, it may be appropriate for the study team to maybe ceding oversight to a commercial IRB or an independent IRB. And U of M already has established relationships with a couple of entities, Advera IRB, Western IRB, and an Ethical and Independent Review Services IRB, and then the National Cancer Institute Central IRB. A key thing to be aware of is that there are fees associated with the use of an independent IRB, and this needs to be considered as part of the study budget. Also, if you are involved in your investigator is involved in a collaboration with an entity that wishes to use other independent or commercial IRBs, that those must be submitted to the IRB for a decision about whether we are willing to cede to those entities separately. When we cede oversight to an academic or medical institution, we review these on a study-specific basis. We prefer that our investigators use the SMART IRB process. And again, a reminder that there may be fees associated with review by an external institution, depending on the nature of the research. So on the campus side of things, we have not seen a lot of research projects that have involved fees associated with an external institution. On our side, for example, with NSF collaborations, typically we're talking about only a couple of institutions, and the level of review, most of the research is minimal risk, whereas an NIH multi-site clinical trial could involve many sites, more than minimal risk research, and a much more complex level of review. So why does this matter to research administrators, since much of this is happening after, a study team receives their grant? The key thing is that our PIs and study teams need to be planning for the single IRB requirement early in the proposal development process. And they need to contact the U of M IRBs to discuss the arrangements that they would like to make with their collaborators, particularly if we would be seating or serving as the single IRB of record, particularly because there are potential budget impacts to the study, which Judy will talk a little bit about following my discussion. So in order to make sure that PIs and study teams are aware of this issue during the proposal preparation process, some additional questions have been added to the path, and I believe those will be released on September 14th. And this will appear on in section 5, which I believe is called the research activity section. And you'll see that there will be a question about, is this study a multi-site study, meaning that it involves collaborators at other institutions? And if the answer to that is yes, investigators are asked to identify what their expectation is as far as that relation goes, that the project will be reviewed at each institution, the project will use an external IRB of record, or the project will request that the University of Michigan serve as the single IRB. So at this point, it's important that our investigators have actually contacted us to let us know that they might like us to serve as the single IRB of record, so that we can assist them in preparing any cost estimates for them, and also to be sure that we have the capability to serve in that role, depending on the number of collaborating sites. Sorry about that. The second, oh no, I'm so sorry, everyone. And so what will happen is during the process, the proposal preparation process, the IRBs will get a report from the system that tells us, for example, whether you have indicated that Michigan will serve as the IRB of record. And if we have not already had a conversation with you about that possibility, we will reach out to you or to the investigator to find out what the plan is for the project. And the intent, as I said, of these new questions is to remind investigators that they must consider this requirement as part of their preparation, and that they must consult with the IRBs as part of the proposal development process. Now I'm going to turn it over to Judy to discuss the process in a little more detail.
Thanks, Cindy. And I would just say that I have seen a few questions pop up in the chat that we may be answering as we just go forward. through the remainder of the presentation. So I'm going to pick up where Cindy left off. She gave you the foundation and the framework. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about steps in the process and how the IRB is interacting with the request, particularly for us to accept IRB oversight. So IRB HSBS and IRB Med are actually working together to create a consolidated approach. Right now we have slightly different procedures, so you can look forward to seeing more consolidation in case you do work on both sides of the house with both IRBs. But just to get us started, as Cindy pointed out, one of the most important things is to have the PIs or the research administrator, but usually it's a function that falls to the PI or the study team, reach out as early as possible to start talking to the U of M IRBs. And I'll have a slide in a second that goes through those timeframes. We will require the completion of a single IRB request form, and that's so that we can collect information about the nature of the study, because remember, we're finding this out at the grant application time, so details can be fairly sketchy, particularly if it's a new idea and a new grant and we have no experience with a previous related IRB application. And the IRBs are not really the sole decision makers around whether or not we're going to serve as an IRB of record. We have a reporting structure that requires us to reach up to UMOR and potentially some other committees in the institution to make sure we are able to accommodate that request. So we need to collect a lot of information, hopefully in an easy to respond to format, so that we can make those decisions. Oh, and Cindy's going to control my slides for me. So she's got the screen share. So next slide, please. There we go. Okay. So, oops, to get the chat out of the way, hang on a second here. So when you're requesting that a U of M IRB function as a reviewing single IRB, as I mentioned, it must be approved in advance by IRB leadership. So I will tell you, and I don't know how many times Cindy's been surprised, but on the IRB Med side, we have been surprised 2 or 3 times with very, very large studies. And I'm talking 20, 30, 40, 50 sites, committing IRB Med to be the IRB of record. The grant's been funded, and we've been presented with this gift from the investigator that says, my money's arriving, I've designated you as the single IRB of record, let's start working on this. So that's not a good approach for the IRBs or for those study teams. So we are asking that you contact the IRBs at least 8 weeks prior to the grant application due date. And that's because we do need to collect that additional information from you, and we do need to present that information to IRB leadership that includes specific representation from UMOR and the HRPP director for discussion and decision making. And then that may also turn up additional questions, and we may need to reach out to other offices in the university as well. So the way to get that started is IRB Med has a Qualtrics single IRB request form on its website. We have a little single IRB space there, so go there, click on that box, and then you'll find the request form. On the IRB HSBS side, you can reach out to Mary Donnelly and begin the communication with her. When the request is for a U of M IRB to cede oversight to an external IRB, you can let us know slightly less time in advance, typically 3 weeks. Usually if you're working with a commercial IRB, that commercial IRB is going to request that there's been a letter of support or acknowledgement generated by the University of Michigan before they will let a PI enter an already approved ongoing multi-site research study. So great examples, a drug study where there might be 100 sites. The study's already approved by that commercial IRB, and Michigan is just joining as a performance site. That commercial IRB is going to say, show me the letter of acknowledgement from your institution that indicates you're permitted to do that. Similarly, if an individual from the University of Michigan, a PI, just decides they don't want to work with Cindy's office or my office, and they try to go to a commercial IRB, our rules of operations with those commercial IRBs would prevent that from happening unless that letter of support or acknowledgement is generated. So to start that process, the contact information is the same as it was for accepting oversight. Okay, so a few more details about accepting oversight. This is work that we want to do with you and the study team before the grant application. So you'll want to get that letter of support from the IRB that says, yes, we're willing to do this with you. So you submit that Qualtrics form, or you talk to Mary Donnelly at IRB HSBS. The IRB will review your request, as I mentioned. The IRB then, I'm now on the third set of bullet points down. I left this intact, but this has changed slightly with Form F, I think, from NIH, but that's not necessarily true for all grant application procedures. So I left this intact. But typically, imagine that, put on a different hat for the moment. Let's say the University of Michigan, this is not when we're the accepting site, but let's say we agree to cede oversight to another IRB. Nobody wants to be surprised that suddenly the University of Notre Dame is the single IRB, or Wisconsin, or another Big Ten school. The University of Michigan will want to know what the plans are if we're planning to cede oversight to someone. Maybe we have a bad relationship with that external institution, or maybe they're not AHRP accredited, and there may be some limitations with who we believe is actually the best IRB of record to cede to. So sometimes we might say no. It's very rare, but we have said it on a couple of occasions. So now come back to this slide, and we're really looking at the flip side here. So just like we don't want to be surprised with who we're ceding to, we know that other institutions will want to know that their PI is committing that the University of Michigan will be their IRB of record. So typically there's a letter of support that comes from those external sites, and that could be as simple as an email. Because we've practiced this so much where it was required with NIH, lots of sites actually have a template letter. NIH is no longer requiring that we draft a single IRB plan up front in this grant application process. They now require it only at notice of award, but other locations or other types of granting agencies may require that up front. And so what the single IRB plan is, it typically looks at communication efforts between the IRBs, how structurally and functionally, how's it going to work? What are our rules of operation going to look like? And we want the PI to be able to agree to that, because it will typically require the PI to take certain actions to make sure that those relying sites will engage with Michigan the way they need to, and that those sites agree to monitoring and communication with us in a manner that's appropriate. So the IRB, moving on to the final bullet points, the IRB would get these letters of support. We finalize the plan. We also provide a letter of support to the PI so that they can provide that in the grant application. And again, this is not the case at the moment for NIH forms, but for other funders, we would provide the plan and the letter for inclusion in the grant application. So when the IRBs at Michigan are asked to review these single IRB requests, we take a look at a number of things, and that's why having you give us some amount of information up front is really important. So we want to look at the risk level to the participants in the study, and we want to look at the complexity of the study design. So is it actually only data that we're moving around? That's very different kind of assessment than if it's a phase 1 clinical trial, which means it's the first time that drug or device has been tested in human beings and the risk level is very high. Is the request only for us to be the IRB of record of one site, or is it a request, like we've been surprised by, to be the IRB of record for a 50-site study? You know, there may be times when it's too many sites for the University of Michigan to agree to take on oversight for. We're just not set up to function like a commercial IRB. We were designed and built to be an academic IRB looking after ourselves, and to take on this new role has taken some time and adaptation to our procedures and our technology, and maybe we're not quite ready to take on a really big study like that. We also want to look at the ability of the study team and to take on those additional responsibilities, because we're going to need help, meaning IRB Med, it's going to need, or IRB HSBS, need help to manage the submission volume, and maybe most importantly, to continue to have that communication stream with all those sites that we are IRB of record for. We've developed some nice tools in eResearch, which have greatly improved the ability to do that, but we still need that partnership with the study team. As I mentioned, we're going to look at the number of participating sites and also the location of those sites. We are not obligated in either by NIH or the Common Rule to take on oversight of international locations. So we'll want to know if you have any of those. And then we would remove, typically we would not agree to be an IRB of record for a participating site that's located internationally. And then on the IRB Med side, we also want to take one additional assessment point. We want to look at who holds an IND or an IDE with FDA. So that's where there's a brand new investigational drug or investigational device. It does become awkward when someone at an external institution holds the IND or the IDE, because there are tremendous additional obligations for a sponsor investigator who holds that, basically that contract with FDA. And we may make a decision not to be the IRB of record because that relationship between that PI and that IND or that IDE means there's a tremendous amount of direct communication and additional obligations that flow with that. And so IRBs may decide that they're not going to take on single IRB if that's the case. And I just mentioned that statement. We reserve the right to decline, and we'll help PIs find a commercial IRB perhaps, or ask one of the other IRBs in that multi-site study to serve in that capacity. Okay, keep going. Okay, so now after notice of grant award. So the first thing that I want to mention is that our traditional umbrella applications to get that just-in-time approval and to secure funding has not gone away in the process that we're talking about. However, you will need to be able to provide, at least for NIH, that single IRB plan. It's now required at this time. So that's why we need to have been doing that work with you from the very beginning to make sure that we have an acceptable plan. So now at this point, you've got your money. We're going to want you to complete the multi-site research application. That multi-site application has all the special features that will make it a little bit easier for both the study teams as well as the IRBs to manage this process. So we have built out in the last year a participating site module. So the one the 1 to 50 sites who we're going to be IRB of record for have a place to go in there, so they can put their site-specific information in that location. In this multi-site application, we also expect the study teams to give us other required and very typical documents like protocols, the informed consent template that will be used across the sites, any recruitment materials. For clinical research, there's typically a manual of procedures, which is more detailed than the protocol would be, and any other study-specific documents. And then we're going to want a list of those participating sites, including the site PIs and the PI emails. So at these first steps, we're just collecting all the information that we need, the basic information. It's going to undergo a full IRB regulatory review, and we are going to approve in concept these performance sites. So we can look down the list and say, yeah, we know all these sites and we feel comfortable. Maybe there's one on there we're not so comfortable with, and maybe we'll ask for some more information about that. So those sites are not actually approved as single IRB sites at this point in time. We still need to collect additional information from them. Cindy mentioned local context information. So we need to find out everything that goes on at those sites. Maybe they're in a different state, and maybe they have a different age of majority for minors. There's only 3 states that are not 18, I believe. So maybe we need to collect that information, or child abuse reporting information. So the IRB still have work to do at this point, which is why it's a conceptual approval of those performance sites, and they'll be added later. So this is where the study teams and the IRBs, to some extent, start communicating with those external sites. Those participating site modules or applications are created in the multi-site research application once it's been IRB approved. At this point, if U of M is also a performance site, we will, and I know this is cumbersome and awkward, and I'm sorry, but for the moment it's the best we can do. We're going to have you create a performance site application, which is where you tell us exactly what you would normally tell us when you're being a performance site, just if you were just a single standalone site at the University of Michigan. The reason you have to do that separately is the multi-site application does not route to all the ancillary committees. That multi-site application is really for the IRB's eyes only. This helps us get that multi-site study set up. And so if you actually are a performance site at Michigan and you need to route to any ancillary committees, that's why we need a separate application from you. So for example, conflict of interest could do its work, or the research pharmacy would do the work that it needs to do, looking at Michigan as the performance site. And so just another reminder here, those external sites are still not activated until the U of M IRB has reviewed and approved those one at a time. And that can be done by expedited review at this point. Even if the study had to go to a full review committee, if they've signed off in principle, then those sites can just come on board individually through expedited review. This is just a quick, you may not work in this space, but this is just a quick little screenshot of what it looks like in the eResearch multi-site application. So up at the top in the upper left, you can see there's a little checkbox to say, I'm intending to complete the multi-site research application where Michigan is a coordinating center or serving as the IRB of record. And then where we're talking about participating sites, there's just a little screen clip here about where study teams go in. It's on the left-hand side of the, if you had a full screen open, you'd see this on the left-hand side, where they can click on those activities to create the participating sites, post correspondence, and then make notification to those site PIs, but that's an IRB function only, so study teams would not see that. Okay, so we're moving along in the process now. We've have our multi-site MSR application approval, and we're working on getting those participating sites up and running. So we're going to collect a lot of standard looking information from the sites, who the PIs are, and what the federal-wide assurance number is, and that helps us with the single IRB of record, record keeping. Are any friends accounts needed for individuals to come into our system? The sites are notified that the applications are initiated, and those directions are going to be sent out so that they know exactly how to work in that space. We have back in the IRB space, back here at IRB Med or IRB HSBS, simultaneously we're now collecting that local context information about anything that goes on at that institution or any state laws, anything else that would be unique to that site that would be different than the University of Michigan. And then finally, when all this is done, the reviews are completed and that site is activated, and we will, in a way that feels typical or traditional, watermark any site-specific documents. So I want to spend just a quick moment talking about allowable charges. So primary activities that are going to be conducted by the University of Michigan anyway, irrespective of whether there's one other participating site or 50, are not, as you would know, are not able to be separately charged as part of. So that's just considered the ethical review already covered by any indirect costs. If you click one more time. So their charges indirect, there's no additional recharges permitted. And click again. However, and you don't have to read all the words here, we'll go on to the next slide in just a moment. Secondary activities that are site specific will be able to be charged. And Cindy, I think if you click one more time, it says something at the bottom, but I can't read it. What does it say? It's buried on my screen.
Maybe
I think it
says direct costs.
Okay, maybe charges direct cost. Okay, so let's flip to the next slide, and then in a more readable format, we can look at this. So some examples would be if IRB Med or HSBS has to look at the investigator qualifications and study teams, their composition or any changes across time. So you may or may not know, it doesn't happen very often, but IRBs are required to look at investigator qualifications, and if we feel they're not qualified, we can reject them as a PI. So we'd have to do that for every oncoming site. We have to look at their CVs and look at their experience. We want to look at the institutional capabilities of that external institution to actually do this work. Are they perhaps biting off more than they can chew? As I mentioned, we look at state and local regulations. You know, what is the community ethos? What is the environment in that community? Are they going to be accepting of this study, or are there going to be special considerations like, you know, it's really going to potentially target a disease that might be more prominent in a minority population? So are they making sure that the consent forms are going to be translated? There'll be site-specific amendments coming from those sites. So Michigan might not have to amend for something, but maybe University of Notre Dame doesn't have a particular piece of equipment that's in that protocol and it's required, and they're going to put forward an alternative piece of equipment. We're going to have to review that separately. There's separate continuing reviews for each site, separate review of reportable events, which are all the problems that arise, either adverse events, unanticipated problems, protocol deviations. We may have to make separate and individual reports to federal agencies or the funding institute. We would be expected to review complaints that arise during the conduct of the study. And then if there was any serious or continuing noncompliance that affected the other sites, we'd have to notify them of that. And just generally stay in communication with sites on matters related to single IRB determinations. These are all examples of activities that we are able to charge for. So when we're going to work with you to prepare these budget considerations for accepting oversight, what we're going to do is, and Cindy mentioned this before, but take a look at the type of authorization agreement that's necessary, look at that local context information, and then we're going to, at the end of all this, assess, and this is more of an IRB med practice right now. Cindy and her team are developing their own practice, but we're going to assign a low, medium, or high complexity assessment to that study. And then that will help us assess, based on a number of sites, what that budget will look like. So that'll give us a multiplier, and we'll be able to multiply that times 1 site or times 50 sites. And then finally, we will also budget in whether or not there'll need to be quality assurance reviews that we will need to conduct to make sure that actually what those external sites say they're doing, they are actually doing. Just because everybody promises to do the right thing doesn't mean it always works out that way. So as I mentioned, IRB HSBS is working on developing some recharge rates. IRB Med has developed these rates already. So we have started working with individual study teams to drop budgets in, and we are planning, I think, can you forward this, Cindy, to the next, oh, sorry, go back. So we are working with PIs to drop in these budgets based on the number of sites and complexity. Can you just go forward 1 slide? There should be something that talks about a rollout. There we go. IRB Med had a soft rollout of this across the summer months, working with individual PIs, and we are planning for a more full educational rollout of this just in the coming weeks while we get some other things sorted out. We are working on building our system to manage actual billing of the recharge rate. So we're doing that right now, and in association with that, we will also be rolling out more information to the study teams. So you can look forward to that. And this is our last slide. So I know there are questions in the chat, and this just has our contact information again. So we have about 5 or 6 minutes. So if Cindy will unmute, maybe we can start to address some of these questions. Someone asks, will these new single IRB questions be on the UFA as well? I think the answer is no, but I'm not entirely sure. Do you know, Cindy?
I don't. I feel like I may have heard something about a multi-site question on the UFA, but we don't have as much direct interaction with that. That might be something that if we have, we'll need to ask our colleagues at ORSP about that.
Because I think just generating an UFA does not necessarily mean there's a single IRB in the background. Right. So, and I think we already answered the question about when to contact the IRB.
Right.
So that's 8 weeks would be ideal.
So, and I'll mention on the HSBS side, because our studies tend to be more maybe a project with 1 or 2 collaborators at other institutions rather than a full multi-site study where the interactions with subjects are taking place. Our process is in some cases much simpler, that we can just say, yes, we can do it without concerns about budget and issues like that. It really depends on the nature of the study.
I'm looking at the question that asks or indicates that someone was told that FDA doesn't follow single IRB requirements. And could we clarify if FDA funded grants require them for multi-site studies? To be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. The vast, vast majority of what we work with are studies that are FDA regulated, but they are funded by industry partners. So I'm not sure that I have been approached yet about this. So we can get an answer to this and then provide it back through, I'm not sure what mechanisms are available, but we can provide that answer back to the group.
So the next one is, could you please clarify whether protocols at multiple sites need to be the same in order to require sIRB? And so the answer to that question is no. If you are funded by a common rule agency, it just needs to be a collaborative relationship to require a single IRB to be designated. So for example, an NSF political science study could potentially require a single IRB designated.
Yeah, or perhaps a situation where each site is performing a different function. So,
right.
And so it used to be under NIH, maybe you could get away with that and not require a single IRB, but it's really gone away. In fact, NIH sort of retracted their statement too, that they used to ignore that. So, and of course now the common rule would supersede NIH.
All right, next question. We have an ongoing multi-site study that's been receiving individual site IRB approvals. However, we've applied for additional NIH funding. Would we need to convert our multi-IRB system to single IRB? Do you have a little more experience with that?
Yeah, and the answer will be yes. So if you, at this point, if you acquire new funding, you will fall under those requirements.
Next one, when will the IRB, when will the IRB inform the PI of the decision to approve to serve as the sIRB? How long before the deadline for the grant submission?
Well, we typically can do it within a week or two. Depends on how clear the information is that we receive and if we have any follow-up questions. It doesn't take very long. But it like I said, it does depend on the clarity of the information. When people fill out those request forms, if they could just spend a little bit more time providing a little bit more detail, that will definitely shorten this turnaround time.
Next one is, will this information be presented to investigators as well? I would say I think we've been trying to present this information to investigators for a couple of years, but the new path question will certainly inform the need to remind them again. Judy, anything more to add to that?
Yeah, IRB Med has a dedicated presentation on single IRBs. I would encourage people who are on that side to look for that presentation when it's offered. Encourage your study teams to attend.
If we will be a performance site for a consortium with another IRB being the sIRB of record, but we'll also be coordinating with other hospitals across the state. Should we do a multi-site application or just a performance site? That's you.
I'm not sure what it means to coordinate with other hospitals across the state. So are you suggesting that we own those hospitals, or there's some kind of spoken hub sort of situation going on? I think this is a question that has to be discussed with the entity that would be the IRB of record.
Okay, when will NIH require sIRB information with the application? What's required to submit? And I think, Judy, you answered that question. Mm-hmm. As far as the plan doesn't have to be included in the application, but if there's a budget impact, that would need to be included, correct?
Well, NIH doesn't require it. The budget goes in at the front end, but the IRB plan doesn't go in until the time of the award notice.
Does the CTSU determine the costs for the IRB when they put together a budget for us?
I believe that's part of their role, but we don't work directly with the CTSU, so I'm not sure exactly what that workflow looks like, but I believe that's true.
And that looks like it's our last question. So thanks to everyone. And Judy, do you have anything else you'd like to say? All
No,
right.
just thank you for listening.